Well, howdy, folks. It's Mike again, and you are in store for kind of an epic one. Hopefully, you guys are ready for it. I'm not sure. I would certainly use the timeline thing on this because there is going to be a lot of backstory. So, if you're not into that, I'm warning you now. Fast forward to the chart part. So, don't say I didn't warn you. But this one deserves a lot of backstory. It is about my Sunday nights with Bill and something I did religiously with him from uh, the year 2000 until he retired about, God, maybe 15 years later, give or take, something like that, maybe a little longer, a little shorter. I can't remember. But every Sunday we would have this ritual of, without fail, of going through preparing for the week. And he ran a list and I helped him out substantially with that. It was called the New Stock Market Ideas, or we called it the NESME, just the letters there, New Stock Market Ideas. And it's something he had from, God, I was trying to find, I have one book left, but I think it's in storage right now. And that was from 2000. I was searching through the garage trying to find it to show you guys. I think I've showed it on a past one, but we're in the middle of a snowstorm. I'm recording this on January 25th and there's snow out everywhere. We're snowed in, but we're fine. We've got a generator, backup generator, because that's how I roll. And I've got Starlink as a backup, so I like my backups. Anyone who watched my fear episode would know how I like to do that. So we're all fine. And my heart goes out to anyone who isn't fine, especially all the animals and at shelters and stuff. It just breaks my heart. But we're not going to get into that. We're hoping everyone is okay and hoping the storm is not that big of a deal, but we will see. But it would be every Sunday at 7 o'clock religiously, I would call them, and we would go through a procedure that would, at first it was shorter and ultimately it ended up being about an hour to 2 hours. And it was priceless for me, but I was nervous every single time. Like, even a decade into it, because you never knew what bill you were going to get, the happy bill or the other bill. So I would prepare all day Sunday for this, and I'm going to walk you through that process. So again, if you're not in for the whole backstory, dude, no worries. Just use the little timestamps at the bottom. I'll put them in and where you should start. So you can, start with the charts or the really more the screens. That would be what you would be interested in. And then not sure how many charts we're gonna actually go through, but it's more of the process. So why am I going through this? It's so important to have a set routine. So I'm going to walk you through the routine that I did for all of that time. And I have a modified version that I do now, but it was really a big part of everything that I did. It was my way of adding value to Bill and to our relationship there, and it was a big part of my life, and it was, you don't know what the New Stock Market Ideas was, which was the whole thing that we would be talking about. That was his buy list, just like I do the pick the stocks for Swing Trader now, and I do that with Justin. We kind of have a division of labor. He does all the hard work of marking up the charts and sending out the alerts and all the record keeping, and I do the easy part of picking what goes on and all of that stuff. And it's a lot of fun working with him. And man, I've known him since '98, so we have a shorthand. It's yeah, he's a great person to work with, and he was Bill's assistant for forever and until Bill retired. And so he done it all, seen it all. Bill had this buy list that he would sell to institutions. Our biggest client was Fidelity, and there was a bunch of hedge funds, and anything from a small hedge fund to the Fidelities of the world, and they would pay for this. And I don't remember what it was. I think they had different prices. I think the cheapest was like 65,000 or something like that a year, and so this is a high priced thing. And I didn't get paid a dime for it, but that was fine. It was just a privilege to get to work with Bill on it, nor did I get any credit for it. That was fine. It was just a privilege to work with Bill on it. It truly was a huge privilege because I'll start at the beginning of it. The studying the NESME was how I learned how the market really worked, because you have, Bill's book, which is more the you've got to read this over and over and over and over again. You can't read it too many times, frankly. I do the audio now, and I always told Bill, I wish he did a full unabridged audio version of it, and he just never had the time. But and that would have been great to have his voice on there on an unabridged one. But you can get that on Audible, the unabridged. I think it's on Audible, the unabridged. And there's some CDs and stuff out there that maybe you can buy somewhere. But I just prefer audio because I can multitask, but reading the book, I mean, this is one that you want to actually read the book too, because you need to look at the charts. But when you've done a lot of the charts, it's not that. It is really hearing Bill's voice or through the words that are so important. And man, the first time I read it, it's like, wow, this guy's contradicting himself all over the place. But then you trade for a while and you're like, oh, that's what he meant. And it's so many times where like there's just be like one line in there, and then after a while you're like, oh, now I get it, because he had been trading for decades and decades, and he put it all out there for us. So that's such an important book. And along with that book, you got Livermore's books and the Reminiscence of a Stock Operator, and then How to Trade in Stocks. That's all you really need. That and the Market Wizard books. Yes, there's a lot of other good books out there, and the Darvis books, Darvis book, and well, he's got multiple, but really the How I Made 2 Million, the key Darvis book. And there's lots of books out there, but I think you really only need those three plus the Market Wizard books. But anyway, so how I really learned wasn't from the book. What I learned from was studying what Bill did with the Nesme list, because that's what he was attaching his name to with clients. And when I first started in the research department in 1997, February 3rd, 1997, and I got already tell I'm having a bad vocal cord day. You guys might not be able to pick up on it, but after months of speech therapy, of like training my voice and listening to it, I can just tell it's going to be bad. So sorry in advance. But as I was saying, I would go and study what he actually did, not what he wrote about. And that was, I think he started the Nesme in 1978, or at least that's what was in the printed books that I had. And I'm trying to think if it went back further. I mean, I started in 97 in the research department, and they wouldn't even give us access to the book, the list, but we were held accountable for it because we couldn't front run, or in theory, I mean, there would be no way that we would know what Bill and the team was going to do, because it would be Bill and his team of PMs, typically would have 10 PMs. Those were the only people that were going to put a name on the list or remove it from the list. And they weren't going to talk to us in research. They were off in their own little world. And, we were much lower than them. So they didn't really communicate with us, just tell it the way it is. But there were two guys that were really nice that did. But so what I would do is I would have to go in the trash cans after work and go and dig the old Nesmes that people would, because it was a printed book about this thick typically, that would be in the trash can, because the printed book came out each week. And so there was no reason to have an old book. So these people would just throw their books away, the people that were privileged enough to actually have a book. So I'd go in there every day on my way out from work, not too proud to say. I would go there with a tie and go dig in the trash. Well, it was technically a recycle, but there was trash in there too. But hey, man, that was, you got to do what you got to do. And so I would go in there, and sometimes people would see me, sometimes they wouldn't, and it was very embarrassing when they saw me. But what are you going to do? So I'd take those home and study those. And sometimes when someone would really clean out their desk, or maybe they moved on or whatever, you would get a huge stash of them in there. So that's how I learned. I went back and I actually studied where he put it on and where he removed it. And that's where I learned everything, frankly, of what he was doing, because what my goal was to become a PM, to move up from the analyst department, or research department, that from there, I wanted to become a PM. And what my way of doing it was the wrong way, but and it is what it is, that I was trying to buy stocks before he put it on the list as proof that I understood the system. And at first I didn't. But then as time went on, the more I studied, the more I got what he really did, which would deviate from what he would say. And eventually, as time went on, and I would get what I would call Nesmid several times a day, meaning I would buy the stock before them, and that was what I wanted. I wasn't out trying to make money or anything. I didn't wasn't really focused on the general market because I didn't know at that point how important it was. I really and it's everything. It really is because that's the weather outside. Just like right now, it's snowing outside and there's ice everywhere, and we're stuck at home. That's a lot different than in the summer when it's 110 degrees outside. You're going to be different. I'm not gonna go outside in flip-flops and a T-shirt right now, and I wouldn't go out there, in the summer with, all winter clothes on. So the market is like the weather. It dictates everything of what you're going to do. But that's a topic for another, no so during that time, I was just focused in on, okay, this is where he would buy it, and I was focused more on where he would buy it than where he would remove it, because so I was just focused in on that one thing. So what you can learn from that is try to be very specific with what it is that you are trying to learn. Don't try to learn everything. Fine, and this is kind of a Warren Buffett thing of have a small circle of knowledge. I think that's how he phrases it or something similar to that, and just really get to know that circle of knowledge inside and out before you go out. It's better to have, in my opinion, have a really deep knowledge of one thing before you move out. And so that was what my goal was, is to try to figure out what was it that he was doing. So one, in stock selection, what was he looking for? And then two, where exactly was he buying it? And then my goal was to buy it before him again, to have proof that I understood and that I was worthy of becoming a PM and to work with him, because that was the goal, the number one goal, the number two goal, the number three goal. There was not anything else. That was the only thing I wanted, period. And if you're interested in that, you can go and watch the goals episode. That, along with the fear and finding your moral compass, those are my favorite episodes. Really, I think you get the most out of that versus, any of the technical stuff, but it's all important. So I would just study those, and eventually our garage was just filled with those, like, filled. I mean, this goes years later, because then when I was, fast forward just a little bit, then I was a PM, I would keep all of the books that I would get every weekend, and then I would have access to a lot more, and I had the entire garage, and at one point, the person I was with convinced me to get rid of them just so we didn't have all that clutter, and boy, I still regret that, man. Oh, mistakes, mistakes, mistakes. There's so much gold in there, but I got it from learning everything, right? And that's what I would suggest folks do. Like, find a service that you are trying to learn that system. So if it's swing trading, you can find a swing trading, platform, or somebody that you want to. It's my daughter. I got to get that. Hold on. Don't go away. Well, I'm back. That was a pleasant surprise. My daughter, I'm so proud of her. She's 24, and she decided she's going to run the marathon. She hasn't really been training in maybe like 6 months or so, and she called me from her run. Like, who does that? Like, they're running and they're calling and talking like it's no big deal as they train for a marathon in a little bit. And I could not be more proud of her. But I told her, don't do it if your body isn't ready. And well, she's a Webster, and I have a feeling she's going to do it regardless. Super proud. So where was I? Um, I was talking about all the books in the garage and learning. So the moral there is, if you want to learn from somebody or some group of people, go and take their product or service and then look at the history of it. I mean, that's how I try to think of it when I'm doing the swing trader thing over at IBD. Not trying to sell it at all, but I'm doing it in a way of trying to teach a certain style. It's like a subset of swing trading, and it's not for everybody. And I don't just swing trade, I position trade too, but it I do it in a way it's like, okay, I would want someone to think through, it's like, okay, why did that person do that, add that, or remove it or add to it. It doesn't mean my decisions are always going to be right. They're not, but no one is. People who like to be selective and go back and just only show their good stuff, but do that with anything. And if somehow you can get a hold of Bill's old Nesme books, which you probably can't unless you know an old client who kept them around, that you can't study from those. But luckily, what I did is I had um, I'm kind of jumping around the timeline a little bit, but just while I'm thinking about it, fast forward after I was a PM and I was doing the list with him, which I will tell that the rest of that story later. I had access to our archives, and our archives were at first were in total disarray. They were in this part of the warehouse where because we had a big giant printing press for the newspaper, massive. I mean, massive, massive, huge, this big building with it. And over there was just this one little like archive, and it had all the old books, and only it was really hard to get in there. You know, pretty much only PMs could get into it. And so I'd go and I would check out books because you'd have to check it out just like a library. And I would just go and I would just go with the earliest ones, like 1978 or whatever the earliest ones were. And I would take those to my office and study them for a week or a month or however long. And then I'd go and I'd get the next batch and I would study that. And that was my way of noticing how Bill changed over the years and decades. I mean, dramatically so. And he was actually much more of what I would say my shotgun thing, at least from a list standpoint back in the well, really kind of the mid 80s, mid to early 80s. There were times where he had on this list over 300 names, like 350 names that were by ideas. And that was really different. When I did the list with him, we would pretty much keep it from like between like 50 to 150 names. Um, and so this period that he didn't remember when I talked to him about it, that had in the books were like this thick because all those names in there. And that was the time that he actually had some of his best performance. And you got to remember the way he did his lists in the performance of it was just everything was equally weighted. So if there was 100 names on the list, each one was 1%. If there was no cash component, and if he had 50 names on there, then it would be 2%, and so on. So you had 350 names and still had really good performance. And when I saw that, it kind of opened my eyes to being like, oh, we don't have to do this concentrated thing of just trading a few names, that there's something to be said for this broader base thing. Now, back then, he didn't have the technical ability to remove it on any given day. So what he would do is only be able to remove it every other Friday. So that helped him a lot, because what would happen later on, and he changed it to once a week, and then then it ultimately was whenever he wanted to. And those would kick us out of a lot of things that back in the day he wouldn't have, but also because he couldn't have, no matter how bad the stock looked midweek. Let's say he put it on Sunday night and now he had to wait 2 weeks until he could remove it. It didn't matter. That stock could have gone down 90%. That was going to stay on the list. And I saw a lot of things that were like really bad and that then actually came back. And so it opened my mind to a different philosophy, but it wasn't intentional on his part. It was just a limitation of the technology. You got to remember that was back with mainframes. And if you're a younger person, meaning really anything under like 30 watching this, like just Google what mainframes were and how like their limitations and everything that was involved with that. In fact, even when I was there in the 90s, they had a huge multi-year project just to get us off of the mainframes because everything was still on there, and they had to like buy components and stuff off of eBay to just keep these things alive. And yeah, that was a huge multi-year project that the programmers, I wasn't involved with it at all because it was all just programming stuff, that they just got off of that and onto modern systems. And I'm sorry that I'm telling a lot of these stories. You're probably like, why? Well, I'm doing these for two reasons. If this is your first episode that you're watching, I'm doing a one for you who are watching to have something free. And I really wanted to have a free outlet that was without any constraints, not attached to the firm, a IBD. I just wanted to be able to do my own thing. I edit this myself and I do all this stuff myself because I didn't want to waste other people's time, because the other reason why I'm doing this is to have something documented for my kids, and in case they ever want to learn how to trade or are ever curious when they have time. I mean, they're early in their careers and they don't have time, but one day they might have some time, and I want them to be able to know what daddy did, because I didn't really talk about work at home. I wanted that separation of work. I'm sure they could tell when I was stressed, when Bill stressed me out. But besides that, I didn't talk to him about work really, because I didn't want to push them into it. I would have secretly would have loved one of them or both of them to work with me one day, but I don't see that in the cards, frankly. Um, so the other reason is one day they might have kids. I hope they have kids. So I wanted my grandkids, especially if I wasn't around, to be able to learn from me. And so that's what this series is for, is really for my grandkids and leaving a legacy and for them to understand. So this one is going to be a lot more of the backstory. Might do this in two parts. We'll see how it but that's why, if you were like, "Why is it?" I don't care what he put in his garage, just show me some charts. I totally get that, man. Fast forward. Fast forward, please do yourself a favor. But this is something to document, and yes, I could have just put it on the cloud, but I was really worried that somehow it would get lost or folks would forget passwords or whatever, so that's why I figured to put it on YouTube. It'll always be around even, decades from now. So going back to the beginning, I was trying to, this is before I became a PM, before I was working for him, I was just trying to learn. So I was studying history of what he actually did to learn the system, learn more from that than anything else. Then um, I eventually became a PM. And if you're interested in that, I go over in the fears and the goals episode. I became a PM, but there was a subset of people that would actually help him with the list. It wasn't all 10 PMs. And he would have some PMs that were just PMs, other PMs that did multiple things. And I became one of those PMs that did multiple things. And at first, I wasn't calling him on Sundays because it was just Lee and Gil that were calling him on Sundays, I believe, at that point. And that was a procedure that Bill did from really the 60s, because in that time he was the helper, and he would, there was Jerry Sy, who I think that was his TSAI, I think, at Fidelity, one of the big wigs over there, who would have Bill call him on Sundays for them to get ready for the week. And so he just liked that process, and he kept doing that. And he would do it over the years, and just whoever his kind of key PMs were, he would have them call on Sunday. So it was really a privilege and an honor and a ton of work without any pay or recognition, because any of the good ideas were Bill's ideas and any of the bad ideas, well, that was someone else's. You can figure that one out, but that's fine. I knew reality, but I hurt my feelings, but I'm just being honest. Topic for another day. Topic never for another day. But how it happened was I was in Gil's office and he was on the phone with Bill. This is, I become a PM for Bill, but I was still not really, this was in early 2000. I wasn't talking to him. It was just, I was just grateful to be on the team and be the lowest man on the totem pole. And I was in there and they were deciding what to do. It was during market hours. They were deciding what to do with some stocks, whether to remove them from the list or not. And Gil just said, "Hey, well, what do you think, Mike?" And I looked at the chart and I'm like, "Oh, that should be removed," or whatever advice it was. Bill ended up liking that. Happened a couple of times, and then Gil said, "Hey, fast forward a little bit." He said, "Bill wants you to call him at home on Sunday." And I was like, I was freaked out. I'm like, "Why?" And I was doing really well. This is early 2000, and before that, I think it was before the top, or maybe it was right. Yeah, it was before the top. He said, he, for me to call him on Sunday, and what it went was, first he would talk to Lee, who was the most veteran, and he would talk to Gil, and then I would be third. last in line, and Bill did not have call waiting, and so the rule was, he was gonna talk to Lee for however long he was gonna talk to Lee, and then Gil was supposed to be calling him until Bill was ready, and then they would talk for however long, and you never knew. It could be 5 minutes or it could be an hour, and then I would have to call. So come Sunday night at 7 o'clock, I'd start calling busy, 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 and like every couple minutes calling them. I mean, that was my Sunday, and that was fine. It was a privilege. So that's how it was at first. It would be Bill with Lee, Bill with Gil, and then I would call. And I took it super serious, like really serious. And I remember the first phone call. I was still calling Bill, Mr. O'Neill. Hi, Mr. O'Neill. This is Mike. I'm sure my voice was. This is way before I had my vocal cord disorder, and was just nervous as could be. And then we started flowing, and then once we started talking stocks, then it was no problem because it was in my groove and that was in my wheelhouse, and that was not a problem. But it was just the very first part of it, and I learned how the quirkiness of Bill, where he would at the end of the call, he just wouldn't end with, okay, well, that sounds good. Let's summarize what we talked about. And okay, we're going to do this and this and this. And all right, well, I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. He would just be, when he was done, all of a sudden you just hear click. That was Bill. Sometimes he would say goodbye, but I would say 9 times out of 10, it would just be like, okay, guess we're done. Click. And that was fine. That was fine with me. I knew that was Bill's quirk. He was just in his own world. But eventually, Gil told me, he's like, well, Bill's really uncomfortable with you calling him Mr. O'Neill. You got to stop that. And it was really hard for me the first time I called him Bill because I didn't know if Gil was pulling my leg or not and just trying to pull a fast one on me. So the first time I called Bill, I'm like, hi, Bill. And it was a no big deal. And then from that, was the last time I called him Mr. O'Neill. And that was a big deal for me because you kind of, then you were in the inner circle if you could call him Bill instead of Mr. O'Neill. But what I would do preparing and is I would look at everything because I was so privileged that he had asked me. And remember, there were like 10 people. And even though in theory, all 10 were supposed to be giving names for the list, they wouldn't because they were smart, because they knew there was zero upside to it. So what they would do is they would just wait. The list was everything for us because for compliance reasons, we could only trade what was on the list already. So we had to give it to the clients first. And at first it was a 48-hour window. So if we put it on Sunday night, we couldn't buy it until Monday because the clients would see it first thing Monday morning. And then we had to wait 48 hours. So you would have to wait until Wednesday. So it was in everyone's best interest to have the best names on the list. So the other 7 would get to just sit back and go, oh, okay, well, those guys will end up getting it on the list. And if there was something they really wanted to trade and we didn't have it on the list, then they would just call up Bill and just be like, oh, hey, Bill, XYZ looks good. And then he would always get excited because they would get the cherry pick. They could wait 3 months until something was perfect that for one reason we didn't put on. And then, and so he would remember that. But if you were the guy, the schmuck that had to call him every Sunday and give him names, even when there wasn't anything good, he'd be like, well, that's not any good. But Bill, I just told you there was nothing, but here's the best out there. But we'll get into that in a little bit with my ratings of stocks and everything. So we would do this Sunday call, and it was a religious thing, meaning not religious as it was, we religiously did it. There was no skipping. Even if I was on vacation or traveling, even if I was giving a workshop, I was still expected to call him that Sunday. I remember one time I called him and the line was busy for like an hour and a half. And finally I'm like, screw it, man. Like, I'm super tired and I got to get to bed, and I'll just talk to him tomorrow. That did not go over well the next day. The next morning, he calls me, well, what happened to you yesterday? I said, well, Bill, I was calling for a few hours and the phone was busy. And so because he could have just called me. And so I figured You were busy. No, you can't do that. You gotta keep calling." That was his power trip, man, whatever. So that's what I did. I kept calling, and that was fine. It was a privilege. It was a true one of the biggest privileges for me because at first, how it would go is I would give him just my best names that I had. They'll here are my names. And typically it'd be like, oh yeah, Lee already gave that to me, Gil already gave that to me, or whatever. But then I try to search for things that maybe they wouldn't, a little bit more obscure. And then as time went on and just fast forward years, Lee stopped doing it, Gil left the firm, and then it was just me and him. And by that time, it had completely morphed from that initial thing because he gained a level of understanding and of what I was able to bring to the table, and then there was a trust there. So instead of me just giving me the names or giving him my names, the first time when this happened, it just blew me away, man. It just totally blew me away that we went through my list of names, and he goes, hold on a second. Let me go get my stack. This was like one of the biggest moments in my career on a personal level. And then he came back, he put the phone down for a little bit, and then he came back and he had a stack. He's like, oh, these are the ones I came up with. Let's go over them together. And then we went over them together, and he wanted my opinion on them, on what we should do with them, put them on or not. And then it morphed into, after that, it was everything. It was what was the general market, and we would go over that together. It was everything about the list as far as removing names. And we had names to short, which we said weren't to short, but they were to short. We called them avoids, but it was past leaders to avoid. So stocks that were set up to short. So even though I don't talk about shorting a lot, I pretty much understand that whole thing because that's what we would do. But that's a whole different world and not an easy world to short stocks. And I don't personally do a good job of it. I'm good at inverse ETFs, but individual stock shorts, man, that's a tricky thing. You kind of have to be wired a certain way to do a good job at that. But Bill really wasn't wired that way. I mean, it was something that we offered, but it wasn't something we focused on. We focused on the buy. We focused on the buy side. And then it started morphing into not just which names we put on, but the way Bill liked to express his thoughts on the general market were how many names on the list we had. So if we were, and this actually backfired, and I tried to explain it to him, and he didn't like my explanation, but he didn't kind of get it, but it was fine. So just think of it. He would really pay a lot of attention to the performance of the list because that was really meaningful to him and to the firm because that was the bulk of the revenue. A large part of the revenue was the money that came in from this NESME product. And we also had a big cap list, which was kind of, just the big cap version of the same list. And what we would, so what he would do is, let's say we were bullish on the market, we'd have 150 names on. But if he was getting concerned about the market, he'd start removing a bunch of names. Now we'd have 125 names or 100 names on. And that was actually hurting us from a performance standpoint because there was no cash component of it. Meaning, instead of, if you got 150 names, each one is worth less than if you bring it down to 75 names, right? Because now everything is weighted double that. So if they fall, like let's say you're in a market correction or a bear market, that if they fall, then your performance is going to get really hit because the things one by one start just blowing apart, especially growth stocks during bear markets or even significant intermediate corrections. And I tried to convince him, like, Bill, let's do a cash component in there, and then we can still keep those names on there because then each one would be worth less, be a smaller percent of it. And he just did not want to go down that road. And so I stopped with that. And so now with Swing Trader that I was talking about, and I'm not trying to sell it. 100,000 people sign up for the product. I don't get another penny. So I'm not trying to sell the product. I'm just very proud of it and I take it very seriously. So what I try to express with that product is how deep invested are we? That's my thought on everything. It kind of starts off with how invested we are. And then I do this thing called a portfolio ATR, which is I take the ATR of each stock, and then Justin puts it in a spreadsheet for us in, let's say something is a 10% weight, a full position, then it multiplies that 10% by the ATR. And then let's say there's something that is a half position is 5%, multiplies it by the ATR. And then we tally that up. If there's a cash component that gets as a 0 ATR, or if we're on margin, then there's even a higher ATR, right? And I'll probably do one on this, but actually, Justin and I did do an IBD webinar or podcast, one of his podcasts on this topic that you can search for. But I'll probably do one on here that will be a little bit more in depth. But that's how I look at how deep invested are we, and then what is our portfolio ATR, and then it's how is everything, what sectors are we in, and are we more heavy with ETFs or individual stocks, and so on. And I'm trying to put my message out that way, which is how I wish we would have done it with the Nesme list, but he just wasn't into that. Totally fine. It was his list, not my list. But so that was a big deal for him. Like, he cared about that list really almost seemed like as much as he cared about his trading account, which is kind of how I always looked at it. And it was really important to me how that was doing. And what I would do is always screen everything to know, because it would be a Sunday night call. We would do everything, make all the major changes, look at the general market, and have a message, because then he would talk to his sales team Monday morning, and then with the message that was our message, his message, and it would get out through the sales folks, and then they would be on the phone with the Fidelities and the hedge funds and everyone in between with our message, which my name was always left off of, which is humorous. Fine. And then it was midweek. And then it eventually became him calling me up midweek of, hey, the market's getting hit, and he's busy because he was running multiple, companies, and he was involved with everything. So then eventually kind of left that to me to deal with primarily. So midday, I would be monitoring the list, and then I would have to call him up and say, hey, XYZ isn't looking so good. I think we should, remove it. And then he would ultimately decide. It was always his final decision of what to do. It was my advice or not advice. And he would do things without me. He would just call up and just remove stuff. So it wasn't like every decision was run by me towards the end, but not at the beginning or even the middle. And so he was really trying to manage the list midweek. So then that became one of my tasks to do. And as I would always be screening, because he would all of a sudden say, oh, okay, it looks like the chips are coming on, or it looks like retail is coming on, or it looks like whatever is coming on. Call me back with the best names you have. And my way of adding value to him was to already know and anticipate that phone call. So I was in that habit of always screening, and I'm still in that loop that my mind won't allow me out of, waiting for Bill's call, which he's passed, May 28th of 23, he passed away. So he's not going to call, but I still have this wiring that's just, hardwired, that and this is going on. I mean, he retired over a decade ago, but I still can't get over that loop that I was just hardwired in, to always know what the top stock was in any group, and what the secondary was, and what should we do. And that's just why I still screen through, I always tell folks, like, 5,000 charts on a slow day. That's what I do. And that would always give me that feel. So that's not for everyone. And so this strategy that I'm going to talk about today eventually. And again, I hopefully you guys have fast forwarded because I know this is really, not for anyone other than my grandkids, really. So if this is boring you, I don't blame you. It just created this work ethic that I had of always needing to know what was coming on and what groups. And even if it wasn't something we were going to put on the list, I would say, oh, okay, it looks like railroads are coming on or trucks or things that we wouldn't normally be trading. And then what could that be leading to? So there's lots of groups and themes. And even I would be looking at low price stocks and things that we would never put on the list to get a feel for the market. And I learned that constantly screening is how I keep a feel for the market. And what Bill would do would be the same thing. He would get the newspaper out every single day without fail, and he would go through the stock tables. And if you're younger, you don't know, you've never looked at a stock table, but in a newspaper, that's a printed thing that maybe you saw your parents or grandparents use, that we had our stock tables that were a huge deal for Bill. And you got to think this goes back to where you could just go online and see everything in real time. Lots of free charting services and things like that out there. So it was the stock tables or everything. And he'd go through there and he'd take a pen and circle things and underline things. If you ever saw Bill's newspaper when he was done, it was like there were notes on it. And this was every single day. And that was his procedure. That's a day behind, but he would still get that feel for it that way. So the same way that I do my kind of overkill thing of looking at everything over and over again, he would do that through the newspaper, and then on his weekends he would look at everything. But throughout the week, he would more just look at our NESME list and use that newspaper. And then you would see, oh well, XYZ went up a whole bunch um, today, and then he would just pull it up on his machine. Not an efficient way of doing it, but it was Bill's way. That's one of the reasons why he had the newspaper, because he wanted to be able to build those tables his way. And I worked on those tables a lot with him behind the scenes, and we improved it a lot over the years. And I'll say this, like, so I got into this habit of doing this and preparing for it until he retired. But there was 1 year in there where, for just some legal reasons, and kind of I can't get into the reasons why, but there were some legal things where we were trying to do some separation. Not we, some people at the firm were trying to do some separation of powers at the firm, and they had it where Bill could not talk to any of the PMs except for somebody else. And so that left us, we could not talk about the market or stocks with him at all. Like, legally, we were not allowed. And Bill was and this is one of the things I loved about him, he was very by the book. Like, he was very risky in the market, but he was very by the book when it came to anything compliance related. He did not want any black marks against his name, and he kept a very clean, very, very clean shop. And that's how I would have run it if I was in charge. And so I really appreciated that. So when the rule was that we couldn't talk about the rest of us, so couldn't uh, couldn't talk to him about the market. At first, it was like, oh my God, this was such a big part of my life. And then after a little while, I was like, oh my God, I can get my life back now, because now I don't have to sit and wait for that phone call from Bill. And you got to remember that the phone call, there was a reason why it was hardwired that way. That phone call could come at any point, night or day. Like, all of a sudden it would be like a Saturday, because normally we'd be talking every Sunday. But if the phone rang and it was Bill on Saturday, I know, oh my God, he's really on fire about something, because then we would still talk Sunday, even though we might spend a couple hours on it on Saturday. But he was always, I never wanted to let him down, and I don't think I ever did in that department. Is I was always on top of it, religiously. But then this year came where we weren't allowed to talk to him and about anything about the market, and we could talk to him about business stuff. So we would do project stuff, but not about the current market. And then I got lazy and I started enjoying my life. And I'm like, no, I'm just only going to screen for I'm just going to look at what's on the NESME list, because that's the only thing I could trade anyway. So I'll just see what Bill and this other PM put on there. But then he wasn't happy with that. And then so he changed those rules. And then we started doing the Sunday calls again until his retirement. And so I was very happy about that. And those were, then when you got it back, like, at first I'm like, oh, now my like all this time is gone, but it was just a privilege, really, you know. So if you hear me complain about stuff, it's like I understood what a privilege it was, and then when that was taken away, it was that didn't go over well with me, and then when I got back, that was really nice until till the end, you know, till he retired. So that's kind of it. In I mean, I could really talk about this for hours and hours and hours and probably then edit it down to the 5 minutes that's of value, but I'm going to just put this out as is with warts or whatever again for the grandkids. In trying to think, none of that you could have learned from. What could you learn from? Well, the one of studying other people's trades, whatever service you take, you know, really good or average, take it and you can learn from anyone of what they do and learn their style. And just like back when I created the first algo at the firm, and that took me a few years of really hardcore work, and I built it on top of the pattern rack that I developed for the firm that took me a decade to. So you could say in a way it was you know, it was a decade's worth of work. And during that, there was a team of people, or teams of people creating algos, and we all had access to everyone's back tests and everything. And so I would study everyone's back tests and learn from them, really would try to give them helpful tips or whatever. But yeah, I don't think people wanted to hear what I had to say. But you could learn a lot. And you could learn, especially if you're watching someone who's doing everything wrong, you can learn a lot from that too. And everything in between. So go and study things. Probably the best thing to do would be go and study a fund manager. Like Fidelity Contra Fund was one of Bill's favorite ones, and go and study what he actually has done in real time, and okay, and look at it in relationship to the S&P and the weightings. Let's say you're looking at a contra fund and you're looking at Nvidia. Let's say Nvidia is 7% of the S&P. I don't know what it is, but let's just say it's 7% of the S&P, and he has a 5% position in it. Well, he's underweight that. So technically he's short Nvidia. And so you want to look and see when is he short and when is he long, and does he have no position, and no position would be very short. So let's say Nvidia is 7% of the S&P and he's got a 1%. He's doing a massive bet against that. You got to change your mindset, because the big funds are all closet indexers, whether they want to admit it or not. And that's not a bad thing. It's a style. It's a style of gathering assets under management. I mean, that's the easiest thing to do. If you just want to have a fund to gather a ton of assets under management, that's an easy strategy. Now you have to have all the salespeople and the departments and stuff to run all the other stuff. But from a logic standpoint, it's actually relatively easy. And you have to be able to have hundreds of stocks in there. And I've put a lot of time and thought into it, and it would be an easy thing to do. Something I would love to do. I just don't know if it's in my time horizon of life to be able to do that. But where you're always invested, and then you're just waiting, so then you don't have the market timing aspect of it, which is really tricky, because you can be right on the way out but late on the way in, or vice versa, and then you get off balance. Or like last quarter of 2025 where I was getting chopped up. Well, a lot of that is because the market exposure, you know, increasing the market exposure when the market's going up, and then it rolls, and then you're decreasing it. Well, you do that enough times, you're getting chopped up, and that's just part of that. That's a downside to that. But the upside to that is, if you're varying your percent invested, when you have a bear market, you're going to be have less exposure or be out. So there's pros and cons to each one. But to getting back to this of studying it, then you don't just want to study and say, oh, well, he's got a 5% position in NVIDIA, so he's really bullish NVIDIA. No, he's bearish NVIDIA. I haven't looked at his holdings, so this is just an example. But then let's say Apple is a 3%, or XYZ is a 2% weighting in the S&P, and he has a 3% position in it. Well, he's long that, because that is a real position for him, because now he's overweight the S&P because everyone in the industry is compared against the S&P. I mean, if they're a domestic portfolio manager, if they're trading in Japan, well, then you're compared against that. You're trading in Europe, it's versus that. But if you look at this and you're studying what they do, and then you can see if you get the history of their transactions, or at least at quarter end where they were invested, that's how you'll learn. And I would find your favorite portfolio manager out there, get their records and study them. And that's how you can learn, just like I learned from studying Bill's old Nesme books. And that's how he learned. And I have them out in storage somewhere. I don't think they got lost in the in the move out here. A lot of my favorite Bill stuff got damaged and destroyed in the move out here. It got water damage, hard to deal with. But I have his original stuff from Fidelity. Why am I drawing a blank? What is the guy's name? The fund that Dreyfus, the Dreyfus fund, that's how he figured out, because when he was starting out, Dreyfus fund was one of the best performing funds. And so he got all their old trades through the reports and everything. And then he plotted them out and he said, oh, wow, Dreyfus is buying everything at new highs. So I should buy everything at new highs. And that's how he learned. And a lot of what he did was so much through sponsorship, by learning from others that did well. And so that's why I was saying that you guys should do that as well, as find something that go and study Stanley's old stuff, or anybody that you really admire, and then study what they do. But more importantly, when a trade didn't work out, how did they exit that? Like, learn the way in, the way out, but do it always through a lens of versus the S&P 500. And most importantly is when one of those big funds has something that isn't even in the S&P 500, that is a huge tell, especially if it's a big position for them. That is where they're truly making their bet. Their Apples and their Nvidias and their Microsofts and their Google positions and so on. Those are just because they have to be, because if they don't, let's say you're not in Google and I have a position in it, and this is a good time to say I'm not an investment advisor. I don't play one on TV or on YouTube or anywhere else. I'm just some random dude trying to tell old stories and trying to help you guys. So if you need an investment advisor, go seek one. But so let's say he goes in there and has something that's not on there, that, those are the ones that matter, because he has to have the Google and the Apple and the Microsoft and so on, because if those have a huge run and they're in his bogey and he doesn't have any part of them, then he's hosed, right? He or she is just out of luck, because now this thing could really get away from them. So if something is in the S&P 500, they're not going to get in trouble for having some of it, as long as it is a market weight or less. And then you really study the S&P components in a big way, and you'll understand it, along with a fund manager, and you'll get to understand, are they really, really, truly just a classic indexer, which sounds like a bad term, but there's nothing wrong with it. You're still trying to get an edge, right? You're trying to go along with the market, because that's how you lose a bunch of assets. If you're a market timer and you're off, which is going to happen, that the assets will go to, let's say you get caught in what you think is going to be a bear market or intermediate correction, you go very defensive, and then the market gets away from you. And then you don't catch it right away. Well, you're going to lose a lot of assets under management, and that's not going to be a good thing for your career. So that's why it's just better to just buy the things pretty much in line with what the S&P is, and then have a couple big bets outside of that. I hope that makes sense. So in a nutshell, if that didn't make sense, this is exactly what you do. Get a list of the S&P 500 components, get a list of the percent weight that they are, its market cap, obviously. Then put your portfolio that you're trying to study, whatever fund manager that is, put those right next to it, and then see what their weight is. It doesn't matter anything else, just what is the weight of the S&P 500. just look and then put another column at the difference and then sort by the biggest difference as well as the ones that aren't even in the S&P. And that's where you'll really learn what they're truly bullish on or bearish on. Hopefully that makes sense. I kind of feel like I should just trash this whole episode because I feel like I haven't said anything, but I've just babbled. But who knows? Maybe someone will gain something from this. So I think it's probably about time to start into the thing. I'm trying to think if there's so many other stories. I'll just think of them as they go along because this was this was one I should have prepared for, guys. I'm sorry because it's such a big topic. I could break this up and I'm trying to touch on things, but it doesn't really make sense out of context. So just not good at that. So let's get into the actual what we would do over the weekend. Okay, I'm back. You don't know that I left, but I seriously just thought I was just trashing this whole this whole episode so far. But you know what? I'm gonna keep it, and we're just going to get into the meat of things because I just feel like, man, that was a long ramble. So let's get into it for real. And this is where people probably should have just joined. So the goal here is to make sure that we search for everything in the market. And this is how I used to prepare for my Sundays with Bill, that I would look at everything out there and I would look at everything, even if it wasn't in what we were going to be possibly putting on the list, because doing that, that's where you gain your edge and gain your feel for the market by looking at every last little thing. That's my strategy. Some people like to look at, they have their favorite list of 20 stocks and that's all they look at. Dude, if that works for you, man, I wish I was you. Doesn't work for me. I've tried that. But what I would do is look at everything in a very specific way. And then from there, each chart I'd look at, I would just ask myself the most basic level, is this something I want to follow for one reason or not? And then I would set that stock aside and then look at those later. So the first pass through was just this massive data dump into your mind of what is going on, what type of market environment are we in? Are they going into small caps, mid caps? Are they going into the medicals, going out of chips? Are they going into real estate? Or where is the market flowing? And if you don't do this religiously the same way, you're wasting your time. So don't do it the way I'm going to show you. Say that again. Do not do it the way I'm going to show you because it's overkill. But I want to show you how I really do it because then you can tighten it up from there for whatever works with however much time you have to spend. But I'm going to share with you the best way to that I could share it with you now because the reality is a lot of the screens are kind of proprietary and I couldn't share them with you, but I'm going to share with you everything that I could. And because back then, when I was doing this for Bill, I would get the printed books over the weekend, and there was our database books, which we called our maroon books, which were this wide, and there was you would open it up, literally this wide and this thick, and there were two volumes this thick. So it was this thick, full of charts. There's basically, I think it was about 2,800 companies in there, and what I'm going to show you is even less than that. And that was just one part of what I would do, and that was kind of the base of where Bill would study. And these books that came about, man, when I was in like elementary school that he designed it, were just genius. And it was sorted. It was basically anything liquid in the market. And there was some other things that were proprietary on there, but essentially it was anything that was liquid above some certain price levels. And he would sort it by the industry group rank. So the first number one group. And then from there, he would do a secondary sort of what he used at the time was the data graph rating, which was what the old markets surge timeliness rating was, and they use that as a secondary sort. Eventually, he would switch to want to use the composite rating for all of our custom books. That's how we would do it, with the composite rating, because that was one that I developed for him. And frankly, he liked that better than his old data graph rating. It is what it is. and he started switching over to that, but they kept the maroon books in the standard way because that they were called the database books, and it was or the data graph books and or the database whatever. So like database or data graph, it was the whole thing. It's a bigger topic than you think. He would look at it so the top industry groups and then an overall rating. And so we look at the best of the best first, and then he would look at the next group and the best of those, and then all the way. And so the second book, volume 2, were all the bad groups, but he would still go through those. So, and I would do that too. So I would get those books. So that was this big, this wide. And in the front of those had a bunch of industry charts and things. And so you get a feel for that, plus a bunch of economic charts and things that he wouldn't really use, but I would study them at first, money supply and all these currencies and all this other stuff that we didn't end up really using, but at first I didn't realize that and would look at them. And so those were those books. And then we would get the Daily Graph printed books. Those were of value, but really not as much value as the other ones, just the layout of them, because they were really thin paper and it was it 4 on a page? And then it would open up this way, which was not ideal. You really wanted to open up this way. And the form factor really made a big difference there. So I developed this along with him and somebody else. These books called what do we call them? AP books. I think analytical perspective or something like that. And they were custom books that you would put your stocks in every Friday, and they could come from, here's your watch list. So my watch list, I'd have one book of my watch list, and I have another book of various screens. And Bill liked my screens, and so he would end up getting copies of all my books, my custom books. And ultimately, those morphed one set of those that had like 30 screens that I had developed, and I don't know if all 30 of them went into his or not, but ultimately we go into the 30 plus screens that became the Growth 250. But those were ones that I created for both of us, and then so we would get these custom books for both of us, and every once in a while he'd come into the office and he'd give me a stack of them that he would have an X through that he had ripped out of the books, and he's like, I don't want to see any more stocks like this in there, and he'd leave, and I would just have to figure out what is the theme of what is he saying, because he doesn't even tell me like, oh, I don't want to see it, that if it's less than this or greater than this, then I'd have to figure out what was he saying that he didn't like. And I love that because it was like it was a challenge. It was like a puzzle to try to figure out what was he saying, and then we'd iterate that over years and years and years, and ultimately that would turn into the base of the Growth 250, which I'm actually working on right now, redoing that. And we're going to be making some changes, or I'm making some changes to every screen in there, plus a lot of important parts of how we do that. And it's going to be much better. And I think it's really solid now, and I still use it every week. But later this year, that'll come out. I'm looking forward to being done with that project because, man, it hurts my head. I've got so many moving parts going on up here. It's not even funny because I'm also redoing pattern rec right now, and I'm redoing all the ratings. Like, so I did all the logic behind all the new ratings, and Justin's having to like type up the documents and doing the QA work on it with the programmer. So there are a lot of people involved, and everyone's got their tasks, but my task is the logic behind all of them, with the exception of the accumulation distribution rating. We did that together, and that was a lot of fun working with him because he's my favorite person to work with, because like I said, we have a shorthand, and I trust his knowledge. And so that'll be a fun one. And we'll always improve the ratings, but we're redoing all of them: RS, 3-month RS, 6-month RS, composite rating, the accumulation distribution, the SMR rating, everything. All of the ratings are getting redone by me, and it's a privilege, and I take it very, very seriously. So there would be these books that we would get, and that were essentially custom screens, something that you can do with Market Surge or whatever system, whatever software you use. And we would go through the books over the weekend, and I would get a box. Like if you've ever seen the old boxes where the reams of paper would come in, like, they would be, like, this big by this big, and it would be hand delivered on Saturday morning to the house, and man, I never forgot having to dig in the trash to get these books and where they wouldn't give them to me, and then now I was getting them hand delivered, and they're all custom ones, and I was making the custom ones for Bill, and we were getting duplicates, and so that never every weekend that I got those books, I realized what a privilege that was, and I would sing a little song, "My books are here, my books are here," and when my twins were little, they dug it, and then when they got a little older, I stopped singing it, but still, I would sing it in my heart, when those books would come because it was a really big deal for me, and at first, it was really hard to rip the paper out from him, but I realized because that's how Bill would do it. He would go through the books, and he would just rip out the pages that he was interested in, then he would have a stack, and then he'd go through that on the computer where you could do more on, and so then that's ultimately it took me a long time because I really felt like it was sacrilegious to tear something out of these things that I used to go in the trash for. It was really hard the first time I ripped one out. I was like, "Oh, wow, this is like, like tearing the Mona Lisa or something." Like, I really I had a hard time with it every time I ripped out. It really was, but it was the most efficient way, and it was great, especially when the kids were little because I could take those books with us wherever we went. So the kids had a soccer game or something like that, that, we would and I just have to say how proud I am of my did I already talk about my daughter that when she called and she man, I'm getting old. She's doing this marathon. Yeah, I think I talked about it. So if we were out wherever, I could bring those with us and then not have that downtime and not waste what would just be downtime waiting for something and just tear them out as I would go. And then when I get home, I would be able to go through them on the screen. So I would prepare all Sunday for these calls with Bill, and I would have my list, and then we go through them together. And ultimately, and I will share the screens or share some screens here in the process. But what I would do is with each one of these stocks, I would ultimately rate them an A, B, or C, meaning A's were like really ones that I would want to recommend for the list, and B's were like, oh, Bill was really wanting some more, and C's were like just in case, like he was in a particular mood that he really wanted a lot more. So when the when the phone rang, it's be like, "Hey, Bill, this is Mike, and I've got and there's not a lot out there right now, but I've got some A's to go over with you," and he knew my rating system, and I've got a few A's, or sometimes I'd be like, "Bill, there's still nothing out there. I only have my C list." He's like, "Oh, okay, well, let's go through them anyways," and then he'd bag on them. I'm like, "Well, Bill, I did say it was a C quality stock, but it is what it is." What I found is if we had 2 or 3 weekends in a row where I only had C quality stocks for him, there's one of 2 things happen. Either throughout the week, we had done such a good job getting every last thing that should have been on the list, or it was the market was tired, and then ultimately we'd have a correction. And so that's something that you can gain too, is if you do this procedure every week, you'll start seeing, like, when do things not makes sense, like, where there's nothing is in position, it's like, "But the indexes still look fine, but there's nothing in position." That's a warning sign, and it took me a long time to pick up on that. And not like bear market, but just like, okay, you're gonna have to correct, because to get stocks in positions, the market has to kinda correct, and then if the market corrects, your stocks correct, and then you see which ones hold up the best and through the relative strength line and everything. But I would rate the stock so I'd have a priority, so I'd have my A's here, my B's, and my C's, and if he was in ultimately, I would stop telling him how many I had of each one because I saw how it went, and if he was moody and not liking my A quality stocks, I knew he wasn't gonna like my B or C, but if he was like, "Oh, yeah, that's good, that's good, that's good," then I'd go down to my B's, and then ultimately, if he was still in a good mood, I go, "Okay, let's go through some of these C's. Now, Bill, these aren't really good qualities, they've got problems," and it was always smarter to just tell him the flaws ahead of time, like, yes, I know this has got a problem with return on equity. I know this has a problem with fill in the blank, rather than let him find it first, because he would find it. So I knew what the flaws were of every single, even my A quality stocks. I would mark them up with a green pen and a red pen. Anything that was good was a green or blue pen. Anything that was red, anything was bad was with a red pen. And doing it, printing them out was always something that was very helpful. I got away from that after a while, but it was really after not having those printed books where, everything was on there and I could put all this stuff. But something for you guys to think about is to, if anyone even still has a printer, to print out your charts and mark them up that way. There's something that I think you learn from doing it that way that you can't learn by marking it up on the screen. Now, marking it up on the piece of paper, you do that once, toss it. So it's not efficient. It's better to mark it up on the chart because then those are still there. But I'm just telling you, I think you'd learn more from doing it by hand. But try it out and see if it works for you. So we go through the whole process of my A's, B's, C's, and then we decide and say, okay, well, you go like, okay, I think these three of your names look good. And then, as I said before, then we would go through his names. He'd go, okay, let me go grab my stack. I don't know why you never had him next to him. And he'd come back. Dogs would be barking in the background. He's like, oh, you gotta calm down. He always had like 4 or 5 dogs. And he'd come back and then we'd go through his charts and then decide. Lots of times we would have picked the same ones and we would go over those together. And then collectively, I would have had the list and said, okay, well, we decided on putting these 3 chip names on. And then he'd go, well, that's probably too many of the chips. Let's just do one of them. And then we'd have to pick which one was the best one. Or sometimes he would really look at the group move and go, okay, we've got these 3, but are there any others out there? And then we go through those other ones. And again, my value add was to always know what those were, to always be able to say, oh, well, what about XYZ and ABC and CDE and whatever of these stocks to go over with him no matter what the category was. And so I put all this pressure on myself. But on top of that, I would also have to read up on the stories on these things. So I knew what they did. I had to, play on the company's websites and I would, look at the sponsorship. And I mean, it was hardcore. I'd spend the entire day primarily doing this. And this was every given Sunday, really. So that's what we did. And then we would talk about, okay, well, what do we think about the general market? And we'd go through that thing. And what was always fun, and I'll just get into this a little bit, and then I promise I will get into some of the screens, is Bill was a political junkie like you've never seen before. And a lot of the reason why he kept the newspaper around is because he wanted to have his message out there. And if you didn't know, Bill was a hardcore conservative, as I am. You probably don't get it. Like there's not a lot of deadheads that are hardcore conservatives, but I'm my own version of a hardcore conservative as he was. And I didn't really know anything about politics when I started working for him. And we started one Sunday night early on. He asked me about something politically, and I didn't know what he was talking about because I didn't have time to follow politics. And he was really disappointed. You don't know about whatever. And I remember he talked to me about what was the old thing in Russia, the Pravda or whatever, and like all these things that at the time I didn't know anything about and didn't really understand history the way I should have. Because in school, you're trying to study for a test, which is just freaking silly. Like memorize what was the date that this happened or this happened. It's like, what is the concept? Like, why did this event happen and what were the pros and cons, what came out of that and really, and how could that impact our current, because history repeats itself. I learned so much from him on that, and it forced me to really get into politics so I could have these conversations with him that were intelligent. But when it came to the politics, I learned that pretty much just speak up 10% of the time to let him know that I'm aware and picking up what he's putting down. And we ended up helping behind the scenes with, some of the different political presidential campaigns behind the scenes with Bush and all of those ones. And that was a big deal. It was really, politics were a huge part. Now, really bad for business, and especially these days, I got some hate on the Bob Weir episode, this Democrat that I used to have some conversations online with. It was like, oh, Bobby, you hated Bobby and you hated Democrats. No, I don't hate anybody, man. I don't hate anyone. Anyone who's watched any of these, I don't hate anybody. I just have my own opinions. We live in America. You're allowed to have your own opinions. Thank God we have people like my father who was a Marine for 20 years fighting for you to have your opinion and me to have my opinion and all the other veterans out there and so many of them that passed to try to keep this freedom. It's a big, big deal. And if you're watching from around the world, hopefully you're in a free country. And if you're not, you understand how valuable that is, or a so-called free country that really isn't free. You understand it. And he really, that was a big part of why he kept the newspaper afloat, because the newspaper was a money-losing business. It really was. And we would call it the black hole because PMs would make a bunch of money so the paper could stay afloat. I mean, that's the reality of it. And the point was, I started watching all these Sunday shows, and I'd start watching C-SPAN and stuff that really got hardcore into it. Now I've completely gotten away from politics because it was impacting my health, blood pressure and stuff. I'd get so upset with stuff, and then there was so much division, and I just said, you know what? I don't have time anymore to be dialed into that world and so much misinformation and stuff out there. Of course, I'll always vote and have an informed vote and everything, but I don't get into politics. I don't talk politics. I don't talk politics with anybody. It's just not my thing. But I used to talk to him about it, and I learned so much. In as much as he knew about the market, he knew way more about politics. And I say that all the time because it was true, and I learned so much from him. And even back in the day, in fact, I'm going to go grab it. I'll be right back. Okay, I'm back. I had to go get this. And this was Phil's first book. And I think it's probably impossible to get a copy. How to Create Great Opportunity and Growth in the USA, a long-term growth plan for America. And this he wrote in 1980, and it was a lot, a lot of it was directed at well, Carter and things. And this again was, I think this is, I mean, it's impossible to get one of these. And I had a stash of these, and I kept giving them out and giving them out. And then I finally kept this last one because this was one with, you know, this was Bill's version. So and his notes in it. And so didn't want to give that away. But that's what he really, truly cared about. And then he has some of the things in the back of some of his ads that he put out in the newspaper or out in newspapers. Let me see. And then here's a little thing from Bill in there, but the rest of it is just, this was his true interest. And I really think he should have just been a politician, but he didn't have time for it. But I think he would have been a great one. Well, depends on your political views. If you're conservative, yes. And if you're, and I gotta just say, man, liberals and conservatives, I think we all have a lot more in common than you think. We all want what's best for everyone. We just have different solutions for it. And I think if you got people in a room who didn't try to put each other down, like, oh, you shouldn't, like the person who's like, you can't say you like Bob Weir because you're conservative. Like, give me a break, man. What is wrong with you? That is just crazy talk. If I didn't like entertainers for their political views, I wouldn't, there's no entertainers out there that are allowed to say that they're conservative. I mean, you got like Ted Nugent, and that's about it. And he's blacklisted by so many people. But if we just all heard the other side, because a solution is somewhere in between, right? It's not what the right or the left, it's somewhere in between. And if people just started hearing each other, we'd probably come up with new solutions that everyone could get on board with. There's room somewhere in the middle, but what are you going to do? So the point was, whenever it was an election year on the Sunday, the tail end, you could tell that Bill was like a little kid. He just wanted to talk politics, and he wanted to get through kind of like eating his peas and carrots so he could get to his main meal. Like the work had to be done, and so he would do the work, but he really wanted to get on to talk politics. and I just sat and absorbed it and listened to it and just learned so much from him. He was a true patriot and really loved our country as do I. So with that said, let's get into this already. I don't even know if I'm going to release this, frankly. I kind of have to because I want my grandkids to have access to it. So let's get through some work so I can at least put this out there. So here is the market surge, and I'm just going to walk you through. This is legacy market surge. We do have a beta that's out, but it's very buggy, and so I just don't want to do that with this. But you'll be able to run these same screens and stuff with the beta. So I created some screens on how I would do it now to try to get it similar to what I would have done on any given Sunday with him. So let's go through. And if any stocks that I talk about, I'm not going to say I have a position in it because I'm recording this and I don't know when I'm going to be releasing it. So it would be kind of misinformation because I might say I have a position in it and by then I don't, or I might say I don't have a position in it and by then I do. So for compliance reasons, just assume any stock that I might talk about, I have a position in when this is released. So ultimately, we're going to get to this list of 1,585 stocks, which might seem like too many for you, but back when I did it, again, those maroon books alone were 2,800 stocks, so way more than this. But I'm going to show you how I got to this. So if you want to duplicate it or get close to it, so I built these screens for this. Let's just, oops. Let's go to all of them up here. So the first one is just a very basic one with something that's really powerful in there. So if you look at the screening, look up in this section up here, and we always start off with some just bare minimums. So $10 or higher. Most of the time, what we would have is a custom way. He was into, if it was a NASDAQ stock, he would want it to be $12 to $15. So your minimum would be $12. And if it was a Amex or a New York stock, he would want it to be greater than $20. But for this, I'm doing it down to $10. Then dollar volume, he didn't use it. The reason why we use dollar volume is because of me, frankly. I think share volume is absolutely silly, but you really want to know how much money is flowing through, because if you're looking at it from a liquidity standpoint, the number of shares that go through don't make any sense. Let's say you have a stock that trades 1 million shares a day, but one of them is $10 a stock, $10 a share. Another one is $1,000 a share. That same million shares, that's a lot different money that's flowing through. And that always bothered me. So we started putting dollar volume in on things and got into the whole dollar volume kick. I explained it to Bill a million times. He did not like it at all. He used share volume, and I'll talk about that in a second. Another thing to just exclude the ETFs and closed-end funds, because that's a whole different thing. And we didn't, very rarely did we ever do anything with closed-end funds. I haven't traded a closed-end fund in probably a couple of decades. So I just exclude those. And then this is the key on here. So when you're creating screens, you really want to create targeted screens. And so I didn't want to share every last targeted screen with you today, because a lot of that would be kind of proprietary, because it would be very much like what I do with the Growth 250 screens. But there's, 30 plus screens behind the scenes in there. And, one screen would be for return on equity. Another one would be for margins. Another one would be for just technicals. Another one would be for composite. Another one would be for dollar volume. And another one would be for near new highs. And another one would be RS line at new highs, and so on and so forth. There would be all these different ones. They're very targeted towards towards what it's going for. So if you are creating a screen, I think it's a lot better to do a bunch of targeted screens and then merge them into one list than to do it the other way and try to put them all in the same screen. Because if you're looking for something that has really stable earnings, uh, that's very specific of what you're, and that's going to be completely different than one that is for something that has really strong technicals. Or you might be looking for turnarounds, and that's going to be completely different than something that has a high stability factor. And so the more targeted you can do, the better. And some of my other early W or Webby Rambles on, I think it was either How I Use Market Surge or another one of the early or the Growth 250 episode has more on individual screens. And on my Twitter handle or X handle, mwebster1971, over the years, I've shared a lot of different screens. But this one is just RS line within 5% of highs, and it's amazing how good that is. Let's just look at that list, and let's look at the most liquid name in here. Okay, so MU, which I just will say I have a position in, but I'm I'm just going to do that blanket thing that assume I have a position in everything. This one, the RS line is within 5% of its 52-week highs because it's at new highs. So that makes it through. Let's see. Um, let's see some of them that have a low RS number. Now, RS number is completely different. That is how is it done versus the database. Let's see. Do I have RS in there? Why is RS not in this one? Oh, there it is. Let's look at some low ones. Okay. So this relatively new, this is an IPO or spinoff. Well, let's not even get into that. So this one, the RS line is within 5% of its 52-week highs. Let's look at the next one. Okay, so this one has been around a while, and it has a low relative strength number, but that RS line is within 5% of highs. Same thing with this one. So these are ones that wouldn't normally make it through your screens, but within the RS line is near no highs. So that's a good catch-all. Is it perfect? No, nothing is. Okay, the next one, this is super important. RS lines at new highs. Now, pay attention to kind of the things that change. This one, $10. This one, $8 minimum. The reason being that with the $8 minimum, if something has an RS line at new highs, you want to get it on your watch list even before you're going to trade it. I'm not going to trade a stock under $10, maybe once in a blue moon, but I want to watch it. So if that RS line is at new highs, even though it might be too thin, which this one I put the dollar volume very low at $5 million volume, whereas the last one was $25 million. Even though it says 25,000, we just like to confuse people and do things in thousands. It just goes back to how the database was set up from back in the yesteryear with the mainframes and all. But at least with the legacy version, it's still this way. The 5,000. I'm trying to think if we change that with beta. So many things going on. I can't remember off the top of my head. So 5 million here and 8. So it's very, very, very low, but it's also to give you a feel. You want to make sure that you're catching the stocks that have a RS line at new highs, probably the best single thing that you can look at. And that's because it's so powerful in it. If you look at this, there's nothing else. I don't have EPS, RS rating. I don't have anything else in there. It's very loose because it's just targeted to RS line and new highs. And let's look at a few of these. Let's look at from the most liquid. Again, the MU, and then we've got NEM, gold stock, another gold stock, a bank. So NU here. And then you look and say, oh, Brazil, a large Brazil stock is doing well. So then that would tell me, oh, I want to go and look at every Brazil ATR there is. That's how I would use this. Not so much just what would I do with this stock? Where is that money flowing? Next one, another gold stock. Gold's been hot. Then now we get into the whole specialty metals and lithium and all that stuff. And then there's more mining and another Brazilian one, another gold one. So you can kind of see what the theme is there. And sometimes what you can do is just look at the full list and sort it by sector and get a lot from that. You know, if you've been asleep at the switch, yeah, mining is super hot, metals, machinery, some energy in here, some banks, and that's very helpful to kind of get a sense of, you know, what's really moving. Okay. Next, just a basic 50, 200, meaning the stock is above its 50 and above its 200. In almost no cases do I think I ever recommended a name to him that was underneath the 50 or the 200. But didn't mean that I wouldn't look at them underneath there to see where there were. Yeah, I can't imagine. And it would have had to been a shakeout plus 3 would be the only case. But typically he would come up with the shakeout plus 3s. So this one, again, exclude the ETFs. We go back with our standard $25 million volume. That's kind of our default price of $10, and then just above the 50 and above the 200 days. So that gives us 1,000 names. And if you're asking, would you really go through 1,000 names? No, we'll go through more than 1,000 names. Next, we go to IPOs. This one, you want to be really careful with screening. You want to just screen for all the recent IPOs. So this is just anything that has gone public since 25. So 210 of those. And the only thing we're going to get rid of is things that are more than 50% off their highs. And then current price, we don't want to look at $2 stocks. And so I put it there at $8. So there's 72 on there. And let's just look at the highest price stocks in here just for fun. So you got Carmen, billion to 1, which is not looking good. FIGR, LGN, and so on. Lots of ways of slicing this. But again, each one of these, what we're doing is we're taking these names, should have said this earlier. When you run the screen, you take the names, go all the way down to the bottom. So you've selected them all, and then you merge them into your holding list. In this case, our holding list is the WRO Any Given Sunday Full. So I'm going to put these 72 in there, and it should end up saying 0 because I've already merged them in there. The 0 were added. Yeah, 0 symbols added because we already have the 1,585 in there. Okay. Next, we're going to go with large caps. And this one, I just want to make sure that I catch anything that has a large market cap in there. And I like to do this my goal is really about 400 to 500 stocks. So I want to make sure I get the biggest market cap in there. Another thing you can do is just go online, get the S&P 500 components, dump that in a list, and make sure that you look at all of those. But let's just view these results, and we'll look at the smallest market cap on here. And oops. So we've got the 50 million, 50 billion, 50 million, 50 billion market cap. And notice these are all, you know, these can be way underneath their 200-day. Let's look and see how far underneath the 200-day these get. So this one, Azul, look how bad this is. Let's go to a monthly chart. I mean, it is literally off the charts. It's so far down. It's 84% off its high versus 200. Let's look at this next one. Roadblocks. So why would we want to look at something so bad that if you're trading R style, why would you want to look at this? So think to yourself, what would the benefit of looking at this on the weekend be? Well, it will tell you what type of environment you're in, and you'll also learn a ton from each chart that you look at. You want to sit there and don't just look at charts for the sake of looking at charts. Oh, Mike says he looks at 5,000 charts, so I'm going to look at 5,000 charts. No, every chart I look at, I'm trying to learn something from. So I look at this and I'm studying, I'm going, my eyes are going to this week and this week and this week. And what do they have in character? That on their earnings they're getting sold into in this week too. You have the earnings announcement gets sold into, earnings announcement gets sold into, earnings announcement gets sold into, earnings announcement gets sold into. I'm learning a lot from that. I'm learning a lot from that from the stock for if it ever sets back up, that with this stock, people really tend to use those liquidity events to sell into. So with that in mind, I'm going, okay, well, if that ever changes for this one and it holds up kind of like over here on this week that it reported and didn't sell off, well, that's telling you a character change. And look at that move that ended up happening. So it's little clues like that. Or I'm looking at it and going, okay, this was a cup with handle here, 3 weeks tight, broke out. I think I even traded in here and then a breakout failure. So I'm studying that in my mind going, oh, okay, just a reminder of something that had a serious flaw in it, which was this week, breaks out and then fails. You don't have to stick around. And it came back one more time to give it a shot, and then it ended up failing. And these are where you can really just subconsciously start picking up on things, but you also want to consciously look at it and pick something out. Pick out the RS line versus its moving averages, or the stock versus its 10-week line, or anything that you want to really focus in on, and look at that on every stock, and you'll learn so much. And that's how I've learned over the years, of just focusing in on one or two themes as I'm going through everything and trying to learn from that. Or once the stock goes underneath, starts living underneath its 10-week line, which is like a 50-day, what does it tend to do? It's things like that that you're not trying to waste time. You're trying to gather knowledge. Just think of the whole AI thing, that everyone with AI has got all these massive data centers and it's this whole thing. And what are they trying to do? They're trying to build up a database, a massive database to run everything against. And that's what your goal is. And that's what you're trying to do. Now let's look at this next one. You can go, okay, well, you're going to file this back away, that here's a slow and steady stock that came up here, tried to break out, it couldn't. And then something happened here with this bad week. And when that happens, what ended up, the total change in character. And look, it had one character here. Now it has a completely different character. This is a major distribution at the moment. And then you can learn from that. And when you have time, you can go back and study that and go, okay, well, this was your key week, August 8th. Let's look at it on daily. Okay, August 8th, it's there. And then what do you learn from that? And that it came down to its 200 and couldn't hold. And if that happens, this is where you want to start learning how to short something in there that can't hold a key moving average. Because by the time it comes down here, you don't want to short it there, because yes, you get this little blip, but it needs to have kind of a run up and run into something to have a better type of place to short. And then it just keeps breaking and breaking and breaking and breaking. Okay, enough on that. Then let's go to our next screen. Okay, that was large caps. Okay, now liquid. A lot of this is going to have the same type of stocks, and I go down to, this is the most liquid, basically 500 stocks, regardless of what type of anything else they have, what group they're in. I just want to make sure that I don't miss anything. So I have those 500. And then we've got Bill's Basic. So if you've been asleep and going, when is Mike going to talk about anything important? Well, here it is. Pay attention. This would be a screen to kind of get at what Bill would really, this would be the universe of stocks that Bill would really care about. So if for some reason I was traveling and I had a really bad internet connection at the airport or at the hotel, because remember, I had to do these Sunday calls no matter what. Traveling, I'd be in Hawaii with the family. I'd still have to do the work and call them. There was no Sundays off. And if it was a Monday holiday, then it would be that Monday. Didn't matter, birthdays, anniversaries, holidays, if the market was going to be open the next day, I had to call them. So this would be what he would consider. This is volume that he would use, 400,000 average volume. So again, you put 400 here and it's in thousands. And he once called me. We had put a stock on that had like 200,000 shares traded, and it didn't work out. And he called me up, Mike, I don't ever want to see a stock that has under 400,000 shares traded recommended to me again. And there wasn't ever. And there was one time, I think Chipotle, because it was high price, I think it was in the twos or the 300s. I so wanted to recommend it to him. And but I didn't dare because he had given me that ultimatum. Don't ever give him or that direction. Don't ever give me a stock under 400,000. And so that's what I went with. And then he ended up putting putting it on, saying, "Oh, what do you think about CMG?" And I said, "Well, it is high price, but trades 200 and whatever thousand." He goes, "Oh, that's okay with this one." That's Bill for you. Next important thing, 15% off highs. I don't think I ever gave him a name that was more than 15% off its highs, because I would test out different things and I would see where he would just really be so against the stock. And it really seemed to be 15% was his key level. If it was within 15% of its highs, then he'd consider it. Anything less than that, there were exceptions like the '09 time frame, because everything had all this overhead. That was a unique time. But unless you were right after the great financial crisis, that was pretty much a hard and fast roll off your 52-week high. And then we also did stuff with your 2-year and your 5-year high, but that's topic for another day. Then the next thing is some basic thing for the earnings. He would want the earnings to be positive. Now, I couldn't screen all the different ways that that we had access to in the software program we used, but using the market surge, the options, the trailing EPS at least being positive, meaning the last 4 quarters, you add those up at least positive. That would be kind of a bare minimum for him. The next thing would be EPS at least at 15% or higher. He'd really want it higher than that, but that would be a bare minimum, and there would have to be some acceleration or some exceptions in there. And underneath that, he wouldn't want to touch it. So you could see there's only 471 names there. Now, add one more thing in there, and let's just put in here what ended up being one of his favorite indicators or ratings that I created for him was the composite rating. And he once told me, just like that 400,000, never give me a stock that has a composite rating under 88. Now, as being the person who invented the rating and created the rating, and is redoing the rating now, I knew that that was pretty good at 88, but I also knew that there were some exceptions, and so I would still screen for underneath that. But after he told me that, I never gave him one underneath 88. But did he pick some under 88? Yes. So I would always still look underneath that. You can see there's only 242 names. So if you wanted to be just lazy, you could just use this screen, and I could actually tighten this up with putting some other parameters in there, but it's only 242 names. And even a lot of these would be no touches with him. But if you just screen on this, you don't get a true feel for the market, and you won't have that edge. And I think anyone who's watching this would want an edge. You get the edge by looking at everything else. And there's always these rare exceptions that just don't make it through these minimums. But there's that's how I would do it for him. Let's do a Bill Tight. Oh, I guess that's where I was going with that one, okay. So here is more like it if you look kind of the basic way that he would look at things. And you can see this only gives us 14. So that is a waste of a screen. That is not going to do you any good, but at least you want to make sure that you spend extra time with these that make it through. Now, these would have already made it through the looser screens, but this is what you would use it for, is not so much of a screen, but something to highlight to make sure you spend extra time on these. So above 400,000, above $20, which was really kind of, he didn't like things low price. Within 15% of highs, the trailing 4 quarters that we talked about, and EPS that was more standard at 25%. And so that's quarter over the same quarter of the prior year. The composite rating of 88 that we talked about above the 250 day, And you can see over here, now we're only down 148 names. Then sales above 25%. Earnings 1 quarter ago up at least 15%. 2 quarters ago, 5%, because that's where you get that acceleration. If you're looking at the most recent quarter, it's got to be 25, but last quarter could be 15. One before that was 5. It doesn't mean that's what you're targeting for, but it at least has that level. EPS estimates on an annual basis, that ended up being a big deal for him. So the current year, 15%, next year, 10%. We'd always go less for the 1 year out. And then the current quarter, 20%, and then return on equity at 17. So let's look at these stocks, only 14, but I told you our buy list would be like 50 to 150 names. So you can't just screen for 14 because there's all these exceptions, but these are the names that made it through. So let's just play through all of these. And we're going to just see if there's other things that he would have disliked about him. So with this, he would have looked at the annual numbers and said, okay, he would have won 3 or more years in a row that were increasing. So 94 cents to 124, that's increasing. You can also see this with this being blue, up 21%, up 1%, up 25%, up estimate of 75%, estimate of 28%. So this here, the 151, if that would have been 149, this would have been a no touch for him because he would have said this is a major defect. It would have still bothered him that it went down from 32 to 21 to 1. But if that would have been negative, major defect, I would never have recommended it to him because it would have had to have so much else going for it, or it would have had to been in a turnaround. And we'll have to do a separate one just on turnarounds because there are very specific ways of looking at those. Look up in the ratings, everything looks good there. Stability of 9 is solid. Then we look down here in these numbers, solid sales, solid earnings. Then we look at the monthly chart, and that would be the first thing that the two of us would look at, would be the monthly chart. Well, I'll get into that in a little bit, but let's just go through the rest of these to see if there's anything else that we can learn from. So AU, this has already been going for a while, and this is in kind of a different category because the earnings, this would be in a turnaround situation, earnings coming down and turning around, but he would be fine with this because they've already turned around and you've got solid estimates. So this one he wouldn't like because of the position of it, because it's underneath the 10-week line, or just, just shy of it. Let's look at it on a daily. But he might be, this would be something we might talk about and say, okay, well, if it can take out the highs of the week, and then we go through this and look and see, okay, you got some acceleration and the sales and the earnings are just mediocre, but you have this problem over here of this year. So I would really have to study this and then go on the company's. You can go to the company's website from here and just really understand their product, which I do understand because I've had their product in past years, and I think it's really good. So if you understand the product, it helps a lot more too. Let's look at the next one, Carvana. So this would be something that we, might talk about just because the sales growth and earnings are still there, but it's, really volatile. So that would be problematic. Fix would be one that he would be interested in. Let me just minimize this part. With the numbers like this down here, and this is very classic, Bill would be interested in a stock like this. Bill would be very interested in this one because of this, solely because of this. And this, the sales and the earnings there. Now, if next quarter comes in and it falls off a cliff, then that would be, he might just move away from it completely. Estimates are falling off a cliff here, but we'll see what reality, where reality is. Let's see. Once the numbers come out, he'd be interested in it, but hopefully we would have already had this name on the list. And this one obviously extended, so I'm not going to talk to him about it, but I would have hoped to have talked to him about it this weekend, as if it's 3 weeks tight, over in here, that would have been one that I would have talked to him about. And if not, he would have called me during the week and said, when that happened, why didn't I talk to him about it? We would have talked about a long time ago down in here. NVIDIA, of course, we'd be discussing this one. He wouldn't have liked the history. He wouldn't have liked what happened here, nor would I have. And this space would have been too wide and loose. So because the fundamentals on here look solid, something like this is something I would really dig into the sponsorship, which you can get to the sponsorship over here. I don't really like our sponsorship, the way we set it up, just being honest. The two of us did a bunch of work on our institutional product of how to lay out the sponsorship the right way. And when I get time, I want to rebuild it that way, but with some extra stuff. But I don't really like how we lay it out, but you use what you have access to and that information. But hopefully in future years, we can work on that. But I would really delve into this one and do a ton of research on it to see, is there something different? Because this base being so much tighter than this base, so 13% deep versus 32% deep, I'd really want to be on top of that, because if this broke out and went up here and I hadn't done that already, man, that wouldn't go over well with him, because he would have expected me to have looked into that. Then you've got TSM. One, of course, we would be probably already have on the list. VRT would be something that we'd probably have a long discussion about, because the base is very sloppy, but it's in a strong group. But we'd also be talking about how when that must have been the DeepSeek thing, that how that happened. Like, this would be a big topic of conversation. So I would have to do a bunch of research on it ahead of time. But right now I'm just talking about the chart aspect of it. But this would be one of the ones that we would have both pulled out of our different books. Then we've got the WDC that would hopefully already be on the list. Okay, so those were those ones. A couple other things I should have talked about. On top of those screens, I would always dump the Growth 250 in there. So I would have taken this Growth 250, the 300, I think I already did that, merged it into that list. So there's your all 300 were already in there because I'd already merged it. So 1585. So there's a couple of things you can do to kind of reduce the number of them there. So let's say you have a separate list of stocks that you want to exclude for some reason. Typically they're buyouts, or like let me look at this list, and don't use this list because this isn't meant to be shared with anyone, but this is just a list of stocks I exclude because most of these are being acquired. So let's just sort it by average true range. So typically, if something has an average true range of less than 1%, it's probably being acquired. But if it's under 50.5, half a percent, it's almost always either an ADR or it is being acquired. So you can see this JAM F. So it's being acquired. Let's look at it on a daily one. So you can see that, okay, it's tagged right here at this $13. So I don't want to look at this one. So I put it in this buyout list. Same thing with Air Lease. Don't want to watch it, so I put it in this list. Or if it's a dual class like Google, and I said I was trading Google with an L, so I don't want to look at the other Google, the Google without the L. So I'll put, so I put it in here. Or names that I work for, IBD, who's owned by Dow Jones, who's owned by News Corp. So I can't trade News Corp. So with that, I just put it in there because I can't trade it. So why do I want to look at it? So anything that you don't want to look at for one reason or another, then I just put in this other list, typically buyouts or multi-class ones. Then you can, let me make sure nothing is flagged. So you can go over here. There's a little technique I do. I just highlight all of them. I flag them. Then I go into my list here. I sort it by flags. Oops. Oh, should have shown you that I have these other sorts on here. So we'll talk about that in a second, but I don't want to break those sorts. But I would have to unlock these sorts and sort it by the flags, and then just delete those uh, from there. I would also do the same thing with my watch list. So here's my current watch list that I have. So 200 names in there. I would just go through this whole list and flag all of those. And then when I'm in here, if I'm searching for new names, I don't want to look at ones that are already in my watch list. So I would just sort it by this. And so here the NU was already in there. So, and I would just exclude those. So exclude, let's see how many of them. 263 names would end up getting excluded. But let's go into how I sorted these. And this kind of, this was my list that I've merged everything into. So if you didn't catch that earlier, I create all my screens, I merge them into this one list, then also put the growth 250 in there. Then I would go and exclude those, my current watch list, as well as any buyout stocks. Then I would sort it by sector. And with this, Bill would do it by industry group rank. I don't like our industry group rank. It has got flaws. We're in the process of fixing that as we're doing all the ratings and everything. And then I will be using those for the first time in over a decade once we release that. But I stopped using industry group rank over a decade ago once I really looked into how we do it. And it just was always on the to-do list to improve, but we just never had the time to do it. And so now we're going to do a major thing on that. It's going to be great, and I'm really happy, or it should be great. I'm really looking forward to that. But for now, I just use these sectors, and I start off with that, and I just do them in alpha because right now we don't have a rating on sectors, so you can't do the best ones first. So you just got to choose alpha. So I do sorted by alphabetical by sector. So aerospace is first, and agriculture is next, and alcohol, and then apparel, and so on. Then because I want to look at the same types of stocks together. So then my secondary sort I put as, and I lock these in place. So this is my primary, which is one. Secondary sort is industry. So all the aerospace and defense are in there, but that's just the one group that has, let's look at something that has, see something like autos. Okay, so autos, you have your truck parts and heavy duty, then you have your auto truck and tires, and you have your auto original equipment, then your auto manufacturers, and so on. So the whole point is to look at all the same types of stocks together. And that's so important because if there's a theme going there, that's what you're trying to catch. Is aerospace hot, or are they cold, or is it mixed? And you're trying to cement that to memory, and doing it, playing it through this way, you'll really get a feel for what's coming on. Third sort I would do is composite rating. And then if that happened to be the same, like in this case, both Carmen and WWD both have 99s, and then the next sort would be by dollar volume. So this one over here, just put it next to it. So just moved it over there. And that's how I would play through this. And now as I played through it, well, let's say, let me unflag all of these. So we'll just try to pretend like we're going through this the normal way. Okay. So I'm sitting down trying to get ready for the Sunday call, right? And so now I've merged all of this stuff. I'm sitting down. I've excluded stocks that are going to be acquired, excluded stocks that are already in my watch list. And now I'm going to look at these stocks. And the first question I'm asking myself is, do I even want to follow this or not? Now, you saw I was already in the watch list because I've been trading it, but let's pretend like we don't have a watch list. So I'm going to not get hung up on this. I'm not going to go in and go, oh, wow, I don't really like this day in there that made the base really deep, or I don't like this day over here, this day over here, or anything in particular. what I'm going to do is just go, is this something I want to follow? Yes or no, period. And I'm making this decision within a second. And then if it's yes, and look up here, I'm going to hit the F5 key and look, I just flagged it right there. Now, if you're on a laptop, sometimes you have to do like the function key and that, or you can talk to our customer service about that. But this now goes in our flags. So let's go over to our list. So that's now flagged in here. Now there's other ways you can put it up into your, add it to your list up here. I just don't think that's efficient. I'd rather do it this way. Do whatever works for you. So let's go back to our list. So now I'm going to do it at the pace that I would normally do it over the weekend. So I'm going to flag this one, space bar to the next one, flagging this one, space bar to the next one. As quick as that. Looking at this one, I'm not going to flag this one because now it's pulling back into its base, and there are already two that were better than it. And I'm focusing on this RS line down here. And I already know that, I'm just thinking out loud, I already know that I have over 200 names on my watch list, and I don't want to have 1,000 names on my watch list. So I've got to look at just the best ones. I also know I'm going to be doing this again tomorrow morning. So if this is up, I have a method, and I'll do another one on what I do in the pre-market, during market, and after hours. So I'll break this up into different ones because this is already way too long, even for me. And so I look at this and go, okay, I'm going to pass on this one because I don't need to have this on my watch list. Now, it's debatable. I might want it on the watch list still, but it depends on how big my watch list is. And we'll go to the next one. This one is hovering right at 50 days, so I'm going to go ahead and flag it because that is a strong group. And that RS line isn't that bad. It's not great. Next one, I'm going to flag it. Boom. It's looking great. And I'm asking myself, do I want to keep an eye on this? Well, this has got a power from pivot up 56% in a blink of an eye. I want to make sure I'm watching that. Next one, even though this has come in and is kind of in that position of it, the other one that we were passing, I'll probably flag this one because it's a lot more powerful and I want to be able to keep an eye on it. But again, I could just wait. If I already have too many aerospace and defense ones on my watch list, I might just pass this one up because, I'm probably not going to buy it until it went up there or up here anyways. And that would be something that I could pick up the next day when I'm doing this in the morning or during hours. This one for sure, I'm going to want to flag. It's holding in there and so on. And this one, I don't really like this action on this one, but I might go in and flag it just so I can study it and see, like, why did that sell off like that? And it's really interesting that it bounced back. So I'm going to go ahead and flag it anyways. Lots of these I'll flag even if I'm not going to trade them, but I want to keep a closer eye on them, and I flag this one. So you could see that you could flag a bunch of stuff. Okay. Now, you would go through all of them. And let's say you get down through to just kind of speed up on things. Let's say you don't ever trade banks. And I don't trade a lot of banks. I might just look at a few of the banks southeast and be a little bit more picky on those and not let as many of them in. But I can tell you that when you do that, you do lose a feel for things. So it's good to look at groups that you would never trade, even utilities. Back in the day, we never traded utilities, but I'd still look at them or REITs to get a sense, is the money flowing there? Because you never know when all of a sudden a group is going to come from nothing to something. And that happened with the utilities with the whole AI thing. And if you would have just kept skipping utilities, you might have missed those. So this was our list. So now we'd go to our flags and we'd take these when we're done and we just merge them into our list. So I'm going to put them into our list here. So those 7 went in there, and you could see all but one of them were already in there because of one symbol was added. When you're done with that, then you would go into so let's kind of step back. We've done a bunch of screens. We've merged them into a list. We've sorted them by, go back over here. We sorted them by sector, industry group, composite rating, and then dollar volume. And now we've gone through and we've played through this, and that's why we're not spending a lot of time on any one of those stocks, is because you've got 1,585 to go through. What I find helpful is to put this on play. You just play through it rather than space bar, but you've got to find, I either do 1 second or 3 seconds, and it's a topic for another day. Really, 2 seconds is the sweet spot for me. 3 seconds is way too slow. 1 second isn't too fast for me, but what happens is if you hit the flag button, the F5, in on a 1 second interval, sometimes it'll flag the next stock because of there's a delay in when it's in the whole process. So you got to be careful. That way, if you're new to this, maybe do a 5 seconds or 10 seconds or 15 seconds, or really just use the space bar. That'll get you to the next stock. That way you can do it at your own pace. But your goal is to try to get through this quickly. You're not trying to get bogged down. Don't go, oh, Carmen, this is so exciting. It's had such a powerful move. Let me go spend a half an hour on this one, because you've got 1,585 other stocks to go through. You'll never get through all of them. So then you go through, and when you're done with this, you've got your watch list. So here's my watch list. This is my real watch list. And you go through them, and then you want to get ones that are ready, meaning that they're set up in position. So, and you're also going to be purging from this list too. So here's our first one, AA. Well, unless I want to buy this off of the 21 day, it's not ready for me. And for you, you might have a strategy where you would buy this, and maybe you say, okay, well, this is like a flag, like in the family of a flag, and which it is, and that you might want to buy it on Monday. But my question to myself is, would I want to buy it the next day? If so, then I'm going to put it in my next list, which I call my ready list, which then I would be flagging these. And that would be after I've already gone through to my flags, highlighted all of them, and unflagged it. So now I'm just going through, again, just my watch list. I would have sorted this by something important. Right now I'm just doing it by, by alpha. So just to kind of go through this exercise. So at this point, I'm looking at it going, okay, well, I'm not going to buy this on Monday, but I want to keep it on my watch list because it's super strong. And maybe in a week, it completes this flag and gives me an entry point. So I definitely want to keep it on there, especially after it got support, after its earnings, initial fall on the earnings. Now, AEO, okay, this one was trading it in here. I had to get out of it, but it looks like it's pulling back into the 10-week line. And right now it looks problematic and the group looks problematic, but I still want to watch this. And if this were to, get back up into here, it might be something I would be considering buying. So I want to keep it on the watch list, but it's not on my ready list. Now let's look at the next one. Okay, well, this one is base building. It looks like it's forming a handle, so it's not in my ready list. So your ready list is going to be a lot more, that's going to be your action list you're really going to study. This one, again, it's not in the position that I want to buy, so I'm just going to space bar through. Same thing with this one. Same thing with this one. Same thing with, well, all right, let's pretend this is one that we might want to consider. It's really a cup with handle, or a cup without handle at this point, and so it might just break out. So I want to do all the work on that. Now I am going to pay attention that earnings are in 9 days, but let's pretend like earnings aren't in 9 days. And so my question is, okay, is this going to handle out? And then it'd be something that I'd want to buy after the earnings if it's a positive reaction, or is this something I think that might just go now? Let's pretend that that's the thought process. That's not what I don't like buying stuff right before the earnings. There's nothing wrong with that, but it's just, you have to have a strategy around that. That's just not what I tend to do. But then I would go and I would look at the monthly chart. So let's say I've gone through that whole procedure. I've gone through all those charts. I'm getting ready, trying to have something to talk to Bill about. So I know that he's going to want to talk about this one. Let's say if we don't already have it on the list. So I, RS line blue dot and all, I would go through, probably look at the most recent earnings, um, press release, see if there's anything important there, see if did they beat estimates or not, what happened to the estimates after that. We ended up doing a lot of work with estimates later, like were they increasing it? Were the analysts increasing estimates post earnings or decreasing them? What were some of the key things said on the conference call? If I get in that deep, go on the company's website, maybe watch a couple more recent interviews from the CEO, things like that. So I would be ready, and that's where your work would really come into it, or go start really dissecting the information from the sponsorship. Like, okay, Contra Fund is in there, and he would always be aware of what Contra was doing and saying, okay, well, what have they been doing with their position recently? Or look at all of the funds in there that we would follow. And he got way away from the number of funds back in 25 years ago or so. He was really into the number of funds increasing each quarter, but then he got away from that, and I got away from that before he got away from it, because I just studied it, and that's a whole topic for another day. But we would look at that. The other thing we would do is um, look at the investors, or not the what are they called? The New America stories, which lots of times you can find them in here. You can just go to IBD's website, investors.com, and then read those stories. And that's another reason why he kept the newspaper around, is because he wanted to have a team of people, guys and girls that he trusted, write these stories, and they do a great job writing those stories that kind of summarizes things, because he would never look at an analyst report, even though we all had, not all of us, but some of us had access to all the analyst reports. Sometimes I would read them just for the factual information, never, ever, ever for their opinion. That would mess with you. I did it once and made a huge mistake. But you would go and say, okay, well, things that weren't in our database, like market share data or some other estimate related, or some breakdown to a different level that we didn't have access to, then I would use them for that. But for the most part, we wouldn't use them. But just really dissect this, and then I would go through the rest of the group and play through every last one of them in the group to see, was this the leader or the laggard of the group or not? And one of the things that I developed for that, and it kind of turned into something different, was with a relative strength line. And this was something that I created to do this part of the work, was the RS2. Instead of, should I walk you through that? Go up to the wrench, go down to RS line, the relative strength line, then go over to the, from the default, go to the RS2. And then instead of index, you can just do symbol. So in this case, I'm going to do SMH. So, and I'm going to just put the SMH in there. And then we will see how is it doing versus that. So you have one of these is based off of the S&P. The other one is based off of the group and how it's doing. So in that same group, let's look at that list. We can go in here, stocks and group, show all components, and let's just sort it by dollar volume, and we'll look at the most liquid. So here we've got NVIDIA, and we're looking at both of those relative strength lines, and they're both weak, both versus the group and versus the S&P. And let's just change this back. Just go back for a second. We're going to just change it back to the index, just so we can see which one is which. I just don't want to, should make that easier. Okay, so it was the one down along here was versus S&P. Okay, so we'll go into here, go back to RS, go to symbol. We're going to do SMH. Apply changes. Okay, so the one up here was versus its group. And so you can see it's the weakest, it's very weak against its group as well as against the market. So that's not a leader by definition. Same thing with Broadcom. Same thing with this. Not as bad with this one. So that one, the chart doesn't look right, so I wouldn't talk to him about it, but at least that one's been holding up more. And just, again, just focus in on the RS lines, nothing else. A-Lab, well, those RS lines have been going straight down, so he's not gonna, he would shoot me if I would have brought that to him. Okay, now this one looks, this is AMD. So this one looks really good as far as RS lines, at least for this week. Then this one's looking bad. So now this is bothering me that the group is lots of them. It's looking like kind of like a lone wolf in there. And now the next one, but it's also telling me that's the strongest looking one. I'm just space barring through all these. So this one looks interesting on that level that of the RS lines. But what bothers me is this break over here. So we wouldn't touch that because it broke. So the history of breaking, we would probably let this, or at least I would certainly let it go up to here before I would want to trade it. And same thing with this one. So we're seeing it's kind of it's a lone wolf in this in this area. You could also just sort it by the relative strength rating and look at the best one. So see, here's our best RS line or RS number 97 in this group, and you can see, well, that's problematic because it went from $9 up 88% and then all the way back down. I would only recommend that to Bill if I wanted to be yelled at for a half an hour or longer. Okay, what are you doing, Mike? Not saying these won't go up. I'm just, you've got to know what you're looking for, and he would hate those. And again, look, 54% versus its highs, and it's under $10. So those are two reasons why I just wouldn't even think to give this to him. But it also gives you the context of the group. Then we've got AMD, so the first big liquid one that's in position and looks like it's leading. And one other thing I'll say is that I used to look at all of the industry group charts, and Bill told me not to do that. And he said, those are laggards, because if you're looking at the chart, by the time the chart looks good on an industry group level, the leader is already long gone and out of there, and it's just bringing up the rest of them. And you don't want to look at those. And so I stopped looking at that. That was probably 25 years ago. And then move forward once I started getting into how we actually calculated our industry group ranks. Man, I was just like, I'm just never looking at these again. And I did, because I didn't like it was price weighted and it wasn't done what I think is proper. And that's why, I've made the changes there was a group effort, big group effort of many of us who were going in and changing what stocks go into different groups. So that was just, I just played a very small role in that. It was a team effort, but coming up with a formula and everything, and how we're going to do the industry group rank and relative strength going forward was something I created. And so now I can't wait to use that. And in the future, I want to do the same thing on sectors as well. And the sectors were an idea that Bill had, because I think intuitively he knew that there was a problem with our industry groups. He just didn't know what the problem was. And so he started getting into the sectors. So hopefully that made some sense. And you always want to go back and put this, it's just like you're camping the way where you found it. Go back to index and put it to the S&P 500. Now you'll see that RS line went away, and now you just have the one RS line on there. So there would be a lot more involved in that. Let me just stop sharing for a second. So let me kind of summarize, because I'm trying to get in the habit of summarizing what we did. What we did is spend a lot of time talking about the backstory that no one cares about, other than me wanting to document it for my kids and grandkids if they ever watch this one day in the future. But as far as for the important stuff, for you, run, and you don't have to do it this way, because I was just showing you how I really do it, but you can do it, and I do it this way every morning. depending on how much time I have between 800 to 1200 stocks, kind of before the market opens to right around where the market opens, going through this general procedure. And then throughout the day, I do the same thing. And when I do it, I will do multiple monitors. So I have a monitor here, here, and over here. And then I have some over here, but that's a different topic. So, but these are the three that are attached to this computer. And with this, I'll look at it. I'll have a daily here and a weekly here. Back in the day, I would have a daily, weekly, monthly, and an interday. But these days, I just do a daily and a weekly. So you can see things on the daily that you can't see on the weekly, and vice versa. So you always want to look at both when you're going through this. So for any one stock you're looking at, you're really looking at two charts. You want to look at both. And as you play through it, rather than looking through dailies once and then weeklies once, that doesn't make sense to me. Look at a daily and a weekly at the same time. And when the books that the two of us created, those AP books, that we did that with, one of the options was a daily on the one side and a weekly on the other side, so you could get the same feel. We had a lot of custom ways that we designed it. But when you're doing it through Market Surge or whatever platform you use, daily and a weekly, and daily, weekly, monthly is really the better way to do it. But I'm just trying to target this as most people. And I would do daily, weekly, monthly, but when I would play through, it would be too slow for Market Surge, frankly, for me it would just slow me down. I'm always working on my workflow. So you run a bunch of, include all the screens, you merge them into one list. So you don't want to look at one screen and then the next screen, because a lot of those stocks are going to make it through the same ones. Because remember, one of the screens I had was for the biggest market cap. The other one was for the biggest liquidity, pretty much like 400 or 500 names each. Well, lots of those are going to have overlap. Most of those are going to have overlap. So why not merge them together? As one of my early concepts and what became the Growth 250 is merge those screens together into one list. So you only have to look at that stock one time rather than 4 or 5 or 6, or in my case, I had like 30 plus screens to look at that same stock 30 times. And then you keep tearing that one out or flagging it. It's like, what? That doesn't make any sense. So you merge all those screens, then you exclude anything. You can exclude stocks. If you made a list of stocks that were being acquired or just dually listing, and I always just go with the most liquid by dollar volume, I keep that one, but I exclude the one with the lower one, the thinner one, because if I'm going to trade the same company and they've got two different ones and everything is the same except the liquidity and voting rights, I don't care about the voting rights. You care about the voting rights. Well, I don't know, you probably trade way different than I do. So if you care about the voting rights, you're really long term, and no one cares about voting rights. So if you do, think through it. But every vote counts. So you exclude those, and then you exclude your watch list, because what you're doing is the watch list comes separate. Then you flag those, then exclude those, and then turn the flags back off. Then you go through your list, and anytime you see anything of interest, you flag it, because that's going to go into what I've always called your universe list. You're just the universe you want to follow. Then when you get through that universe list, you're going to play through that universe list and then ask yourself, is this stock ready to be bought the next day? If it is, you are going to then flag that to put that in a different list that I call my ready list. And that's what if you've heard other people call them the universe and ready list, those are mine. That's what I came up with in 98 or 99. And I've taught it. I used to teach it at the level 4 workshops, and now everyone uses it. And people try to tell me like, oh, I put that in my ready to whatever list. I'm like, okay, yeah, whatever. But it's just this concept of you put the stuff in your universe list. That's your general watch list. Then but you don't do any deep research on those. Then the ones that are in position to be potentially bought the next day, then you put those in your ready list. Those that are in your ready list, those are ones that you are going to now do a deep, maybe we'll do a second one on this of going through that in really in a lot more detail than what we did today to say, okay, this is now an A, B, or a C stock. And then that dictates, and you're looking at the whole mosaic. You're putting all the pieces together. What does the monthly look like? What does the sponsorship look like? What does the weekly look like? What does the daily look like? What do the fundamentals look like? Hopefully I said sponsorship because that's one of the most important things. Then what is the story on it? Like, and then really do a week by week analysis on that base. You can see why this took me all day long on Sundays. And then you have that all ready. And that's so that, your A's, B's, and C's. So then the next day comes and let's say the market is just ripping on some news. You go to your A list and go, okay, or any of my A list stocks breaking out, those are my priority ones. I want to really make sure I get those. If none of those are breaking out or doing what you want to buy them, then you go to your B's. None of those, then you go to your C's and you do them. That's why you're prioritizing this ahead of time to help you when the battle is going. And that's how you would do that. And that's the same thing I would do for my Sunday calls with Bill is I would just go through my A list. And again, like if he was not hearing it, not liking those, if he didn't like my A stocks, he wasn't going to like my B stocks. He certainly wasn't going to like my C stocks, but we go through that whole process and then we would go through his names, decide what names. Then after that, then we would have to go through our list, our NESME list of what's currently on there to decide, okay, if we're going to put 10 new names on, is there anything that we should take off? And then we'd go through that whole procedure. Then we talk about the general market. And so that's why I'm saying it would work all day Sunday for this call. And then the call would be about an hour to 2 hours long because that's a lot of work to go through. So is it easy? No. Is it rewarding? Yes. Should you do what I did? No. But should you do a modified, scaled back version? Yes. So what would I do if I were you? I would just do this procedure. I would just start with my growth 250 and just use that. Forget all the other screens. Just do that, sort it by the sector and then by the rating, by the sector, then industry group, then the composite, and then dollar volume or relative strength. You can you can pick and play through that. Do this until you get used to this procedure. Then start adding your extra screens in there on top of the growth 250. Now, another thing that I do is my watch list. I'll purge names from my watch list so it doesn't get too big. And that's a separate procedure that I do. And when I do that, before I do it, I take that full list and I put it into my prior watch list holding thing because those can become very important for you because those are ones that you'll learn so much from and say, oh, I really liked this stock and it broke out and then failed. What can I learn from that? Or maybe the stock is just so extended and it's done that you removed it from your watch list because you just didn't want your watch list to be too big. And then you go, wow, man, the stock just went up 100% without me. Let me go back and study this at the beginning. And what was I thinking? Why did I miss this before? So there's so much you can learn from that old watch list, but also that old watch list is something that I merge in with all of those screens. So the screens that I did, I merged that old watch list in there. And most of the time, all those would have already been in there, but every once in a while, it would have fallen through some of your parameters that it didn't get in there. So it's always good to look at those all the time. So I know this was a lot, and I know that I really should have done a better job preparing for this, but hey, it's snowmageddon outside and I'm stuck inside and I wanted to share something with you guys. There were actually a million other Nesme Sunday night related stories that I didn't get to tell, but this time has gone by way too long. So I'll probably do an episode sooner or later on my other routines. This was my Sunday night routine or my getting ready for Bill or my any given Sunday one, but I would also have my pre-market routine, my during market hours, and my post-market routine. And maybe I'll do one those in the future for you guys and try to be a little bit more targeted with those, trying to think if there's anything else really relevant. There's a lot of other things to go along with this with the general market analysis. And so we'll probably have to do one on that. If this was easier and something that I could summarize in 15 minutes, I wouldn't have spent an entire day Sunday, every Sunday on it, getting ready for those calls. So even though this is long, a lot of that was backstory, but the real procedure was a lot more in depth than this. But at least you get a sense of where to go if this works for you. And you might just say, hey, no, Mike, I just want to use whatever they're saying on Twitter, whatever the hot stock is. Dude, use what works for you. If you do that and it's working for you, keep doing it. Don't deviate from what's working for you. But if you're open to trying this style, then give it a shot. It's the way I like to do things and always feel like you can tweak things. And with that said, we'll cut down on any of the other stuff because I got to go eat. But remember, every one of these episodes, I'm really on a mission to try to make a difference in the world while I'm here. And one of the things I want to do is to try to make it a kinder world. And so I'm doing these for free. And I ask you, and I'm being very sincere about this, that every episode that you do, you pay me back by being kind to somebody or something, an animal, an insect, a person, a friend, an enemy. Just do something kind. The more kindness we can add in the world, the less evil and mean there is, right? And the more we can just put out love and kindness, what's the downside? There's a zero downside that I see. If you see downside in it, you're just a freaking pessimist, man. And like what did Musk say about optimists and pessimists? That love that quote. And he just said it again recently. Like he'd rather be wrong and estimate and an optimist than right and a pessimist or something along those lines. And I totally agree with that. And Bill was such a optimist. And if you can ever get your hands on a book like this that he wrote that I talked about earlier in here that all you guys probably skipped, which I don't blame you, that this was How to Create Great Opportunity and Growth in the US by Bill O'Neill, his first book that is totally out of print. Just go out there and be kind. I hope everyone that doesn't have power or anything this weekend, that you're all figuring out a way to stay warm and keeping your animals and pets and everything warm. And with that said, peace out.